Good morning. So this week, the church in the United States begins a week-long observance known as the National Vocations Awareness Week. Started in 1976 by the U.S. Bishops' Committee for the Clergy, Consecrated Life, and Vocations. It's a time during this week as a church community and as specifically ordained ministers where we have the opportunity to showcase the joy of our vocation, of a life of service to God and to his people. The word vocation comes from the Latin term vocare, meaning to call out, meaning that God calls out from us, from within our hearts, our minds, and our souls to the life that he's planned, the life that he wills for us. That decision to follow the Lord is not made under constraint, however, it's made in total freedom as we listen to the opening collect of the Mass, that we might be free to pursue the things of God, that God, in his goodness, might help remove the obstacles that stand in the way of pursuing him. The Creator, who made us, who sustains our lives, to follow him, to pursue him, means therefore to follow after joy. It means to pursue happiness and freedom. It means to pursue God. And that pursuit, particularly as with those trying to kind of find their place in the world, for that pursuit for those who are trying to find what the Lord wants for them or where he leads, begins first by simply being a disciple. It begins with a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Let's not forget that that's how he called his apostles. First, he called them to a friendship, right? He called them to relationship, and then sent them on mission. When he called them into himself, he spent time with them, forming them, and then gave them their mission. And for the apostles, that mission is the mission of Christ. It's an extension of his own mission of reconciliation, of healing, of the salvation of souls. In a recent statement on the World Day of Prayer for Vocations, Pope Francis commented on the example of St. Joseph. So I know you guys will like this because, right, we're looking to the example of St. Joseph, and here we have representatives of the Meta St. Joseph. So here's your patron. What does he do? He gives us that fine example of just how to follow the Lord. The Holy Father spoke, amid the dangers of the time, St. Joseph paid attention to God. He observed the directive that came from above. He knew that God was on his side the entire time. And Joseph gave himself to the Lord. He didn't ask questions. He just said, okay, if this is my mission, I'm on it. Right? That's the example that St. Joseph gives because he had faith. He first had faith. That's what it means to first be a disciple of the Lord, to have faith, to listen to God's directive, to give ourselves over to him in prayer, in virtue, in good works. Because these are the ways that the Lord speaks. They're where he speaks to our hearts. It's how our young people find their mission, by first being his disciple, by first being a man of faith, just like St. Joseph. Currently in the Diocese of Springfield, we have one seminarian who just started, so please pray for him because we need him. We have one seminarian, but that doesn't mean that vocations to religious life and the priesthood aren't out there, right? Just because we only have one doesn't mean that the Lord stopped calling young men and young women to religious life and priesthood. It doesn't mean that at all. Recently, Bishop Byrne and I, along with some of our other priests, gathered right here in this chapel with 18 young men, all seriously considering a vocation to the priesthood. What a delightful evening of hope that brings to our diocese. Because that tells us that the Lord is still speaking to the hearts of our young people. And as priests, what an evening we had to be able to share our joy, the joy of the priesthood, to be able to help these young men discern God's will for their lives. Vocations to the priesthood are out there. A week like this week, allows us to share the joy of that vocation, allows us to be bold enough to speak to our young people, to raise awareness of a life of service and dedication to the church and to the people of God. It affords us an opportunity to encourage and inspire our young people, first to faith, first to be disciples, to form a bond of love with our God. And from there, he will show them their mission. From there, he will speak to their hearts. Just a quick side note, a little story of my own vocation. When I was around the same age as some of the young guys that were here on the other night for our St. Andrew dinner, I remember this one person of my life, and here I am as a teenager trying to find my place, right? What does the Lord want? I probably wasn't too serious about it when I was in high school and as a young man, but I remember very, very vividly a friend of mine pulling me aside and says, listen, quit fooling around. You're going to be a priest. That's your call. That's your mission. Stop messing around with other stuff. You're going to be a priest. And if it wasn't for that person, who knows where I'd be today? Because that person, that woman, had the courage to lend her voice, to instill a seed, to get me thinking, okay, maybe this is my mission. The mission of the priest, the mission that so beautifully described in the second reading in that letter to the Hebrews, where the author to the letter to the Hebrews describes the mission of Christ to enter the sanctuary, to unveil the veil of all veils, to open the gates of heaven for the faithful. The priest is the vessel of that, the vessel that opens time and eternity, where they converge. The priest that becomes a bridge between heaven and earth. That's the mission of the priest. And at that moment, I needed to hear, stop messing around, because your mission is to be a vessel, is to be a bridge between heaven and earth. We mustn't be afraid, particularly in this time, in this culture, in this era, to lend our voices to our young people, to encourage them, to speak up about not just the necessity for priesthood, but for the necessity for our young people to be who they were created to be, to help them hear the voice of the shepherd, that God calls them. Not for everybody, but he calls them. He chooses them. And like myself at a young age, you never know who's listening. Let us therefore, during this National Vocation Awareness Week, as people of our diocese, as men maybe already living our vocations, to not be afraid, to be that witness, to be that voice for our young people, to show them that the Lord calls them to a life of service to his people, to be a vessel that helps others see the way and the pathway to heaven. So let us pray today. Jesus, meek and humble of heart, touch our hearts and make them like your own.